Hello, everyone. Welcome to Academy. I'm Katie Monday, otherwise known as Autistic and Living the Dream. And I'm joined today by Jackie Edry, and we're going to be talking about, well, all things autistic experience and also her book, Moving Forward, Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery and Faith. So I'm sure we're going to talk about the Jewish faith and lots of really interesting stuff today. If we start first, Jackie, just with a physical description of ourselves for people who might want or need it, who are listening or watching today. I'll go first. I am a large white person with kind of very messy short hair. I've got big round brown and orange glasses. My left eyebrow is pierced. I've got studs in my ears. I'm wearing my usual zip-up green hoodie, which is unzipped, and I'm sitting in front of Simon's favourite green old lady curtains. Jackie, would you like to describe yourself?
Your hair's not that messy, I think. A little bit.
It looks okay on screen.
Very nice, very nice. First of all, thank you very much for giving me the opportunity to be here. So I am a fairly light woman, white woman. Have head covering because of religious Judaism. I keep my hair covered so that it's not. It's customary to cover one's head, and I have dark gray black glasses. My lenses are dark gray due to Irlen syndrome, which corrects my visual processing issues. And I don't know what else to describe myself. I'm wearing a dark blue dress.
Perfect. That'll do us lovely. So actually, just before we came on to live, you were talking about, being fairly new to kind of like the autistic community. Did you want to share a bit more on that? That'd be perfect.
Well, sure. I'm actually new to the neurodiversity movement. Okay. Autism is something I've actually been very, very familiar with for over probably close to 40 years. Yeah, about 40 years. From the time I was in high school, I worked with an autistic child. And then after that, it was my thesis in the university was of educational programs for autistic children. And then years after that, I got married, and my son is autistic. So it was actually very, very fortunate for me that I had all the experience that I had beforehand, so that I could help him as best I could to overcome his challenges, which he had many. And then I had brain surgery close to over 9 years ago. And when I woke up, all of my senses were scrambled, and it was a very difficult surgery and a very long recovery. But the interesting thing was that all of my senses became scrambled. I began feeling on my body what I'd observed firsthand working with autistic individuals. And it gave me a lot of understanding as to how we should relate to autistic individuals. And basically what I was happy about was that it gave me reassurance that what I'd been thinking all the years was on target, which I was very, very, very relieved about. And I felt after that I'd sort of had a mission that if I had this understanding, that I should really share it with the world. So I wrote a book, and I started a blog and got on LinkedIn and started networking, and realized what a rich community and movement there was around the world of people who support each other and are trying to change the world. So I'm very, very happy to be part of that. And it's been about 1.5 years for now.
Yeah. Oh, that's brilliant. Yeah, there are tons of people online who are getting involved in kind of online advocacy and activism and stuff. So welcome.
I've been feeling like a lone wolf for so many years. I live in Israel, and I've been fighting and advocating for my son and all my neurodivergent children, because every one of them has got some sort of diagnosis, and running parents groups, and we're all so frustrated. And I've sort of felt like a bit of a lone wolf against the educational system here. And suddenly I see that there's so much going on. It's fantastic.
Yeah. Is there a lot kind of going on the ground in Israel, if you will?
In terms of what, the neurodiversity movement?
Yeah, absolutely.
there are some groups, and I'm still pretty new to it here. I've actually been more on the international front because my book is in English and I have yet to translate it into Hebrew. I'm still looking for a sponsor to help me do that. My written Hebrew is not good enough to do it myself. And so I'm less active here. There are parent activists, but unfortunately, especially with the educational system here, things are still very much there's a long way to go. Let's put it that way.
Okay.
Especially with inclusion. Really is there's a law for inclusion for 20 years, but inclusion is not really done properly here at all. I wouldn't call it inclusion. I would call it allowing people with challenges to sit in a regular classroom without getting the support they need, which is not inclusion or equitable in any way, shape, or form. So we've got a long way to go.
Unfortunately, it's very similar in the UK, and I have a feeling across a lot of places, actually. Like legally on paper, it looks like autistic people like me and younger people and children are, there's lots of opportunities and there's lots of protections around our rights and stuff, but actually it's all
I think it's in America is similar as well. I think there's things are starting to move as the autistic community or neurodivergent community who have the ability to speak out are starting to gain some traction and make some change or influence the per se industry or influence whatever needs to be influenced, the politicians to start changing things. But there's still, I think it's just beginning.
Can I ask, how does, I wonder how in Jewish communities, how autistic and kind of neurodivergent identities are understood?
I don't know how to answer that question.
Okay.
To be perfectly honest, because I know it totally depends on, I think, the community and the people. I think, and just about anything and people involved with it depends on the community. And I know that, for example, we are religious, and our community is incredibly welcoming. And my son, there are some. In Judaism, a lot of times you hear that people say that any people with any kind of difference or disability or whatever have very high spirits, and therefore they have come into this world with the task to do things that they're on a higher spiritual plane. There are people that believe that, and therefore there's a lot of respect. And then there are communities that have difficulty accepting anyone that looks a little different or acts a little different. So it really is very much depends where you're at.
Yeah,
my son is so well respected and welcome everywhere he goes, which is wonderful.
That's perfect. And so you were talking. You've got 3 children, haven't you?
5.
You've got 5. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, I have 3 that are finished with the school system and 2 that are still suffering.
Oh, okay. Actually, I'll tell you what. I might bring it back just because it was right at the beginning of your book about the young man you used to work with. I think his name was Michael. And he used to work in their family, the autistic young man.
Whose name? I named him Mark in the book. That's not his actual name. I changed his name because
okay.
Privacy. Yeah. What would you like to ask about?
Well, him? I think what my biggest question is, because you worked with this young man and you worked in the home, and it all seemed really, based around his needs and interests and stuff. And then I think when you were going through, excuse me, because it's been a while since I've read your book. I tried to reread it recently, and I was like, oh, I can't do it quick enough. Then you went into, I think you had like a work experience or something at a school, at a behaviorist school. And I'd like you to.
You want me to tell you a little bit about that?
Absolutely, yes, please. Okay. Yeah, and the kind of differences as well for what that means for young people.
That is what led me to write my thesis about educational programs for autistic children. And I wrote my thesis in '87. Okay, so it's a long time ago. And ABA was then called behavior modification. I left it as behavior modification in my book because perhaps people might not necessarily want to read my book if they think right away I was going to say stuff about ABA that wasn't So positive. So I decided that I would leave it in his original name, and then people could perhaps read it with a more open mind. What happened was, when I was in high school, everyone in my school volunteered, and a woman came looking for some assistance with her 5-year-old son, who was autistic, and he was so nice. I love that kid. I immediately fell in love with him. And at the time, there was a program similar to the Kaufmans. I don't know if that's. There was a book that came out that was called Sunrise, SON Rise. And at the time, they sort of based off of that, and they built, adapted, I guess, but a sort of a home program where they had a special quiet room, I guess, to avoid sensory overstimulation. And we used to go there, and we'd sit and we'd play with him. It was kind of a combination of, I guess, sort of a Greenspan-y floor time kind of treatment, and a bunch of other things, working with speech therapists and stuff. But the parents had a whole group of volunteers, and we used to go and have the training, and then we'd go and spend time with him and try and help him. And he really did well. I mean, he connected to all of us, and I was with him for years. And at the time, I was with him for about 2 years, I guess, and then I went off to college. No, it was a little bit more of a time break. But in any case, I didn't see him for a number of years. And his parents were always looking for the newest and most effective treatment to help their son. And at the time, behavior modification just started blooming, as they say, or they were opening the first schools for behavior modification in America. And in college, I started working in summer camps with autistic kids from Manhattan in the forest in upstate New York. And we used to do whitewater canoeing and all kinds of really cool stuff with them. I mean, most of them were nonverbal, but they were doing everything. And they learned to communicate in their own way. And we treated them as if they were just different types of communicators. And then there was nothing wrong with them. I'm just putting it that way because that's the easiest way to put it. And they blossomed. It was wonderful. And I worked with them for 3 years. And the things that we did with them, I mean, from mud fights to canoeing to camping to daily living stuff. And then they'd go back to their inner city sort of behavioral programs. And it was such different worlds. But what I noticed at the time was that the need to stim seemed to go down when we're doing a lot of exercise. The kids were more focused and communicative, and less did stim less. They seemed more calm within themselves. So I said, wouldn't it be interesting to do a thesis checking how exercise affects stimming? And then I got accepted at this first school. I won't mention the name. I don't know if they exist anymore, but this school, and they were a behavior modification school at the time, considered like one of the top schools, and a lot of literature was coming out of their school, and they accepted me to do this thesis, this experiment within their school. So I go there all excited, and within like the first day, I realized that something was very, 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 very wrong. They were sitting, these kids, in chairs, or sometimes they couldn't sit. They would take these like wide felt belts and softly tie them in so they wouldn't be getting up. And they were having them do all these tasks. And every time they did something, they'd have pre-programmed way of saying like, good work. You couldn't just say whatever came out your mouth. You had to say and sign a script, all of the workers. So it would be good work if the kid put a piece in a puzzle. And then, because the assumption was that most nonverbal, or what would be considered low functioning at the time, children didn't have the ability to respond to social interaction or social reinforcement, that would tend to be backed up with food, which oftentimes was sweets, which of course doesn't help anyone sit in a chair if they're eating M&Ms all day long. And so this is what I found myself faced with, and I didn't quite know what to do with it. And then, lo and behold, the child I'd worked with in high school, turns out was in this school. And he was like he was 13 and he was frustrated and aggressive, and it wasn't the kid that I knew. And I mean, they even had padded like rooms for kids to put them in when they would have a meltdown because they get so frustrated. And I'm thinking, he was a smart kid. There's no reason, even if he wasn't particularly verbal, there was no reason for 10 years or he should be putting pieces into puzzles. I mean, we got nowhere. And so, of course, he's frustrated and aggressive. And my heart just broke. And I was there for about 2 months. I could not do what they were telling me to do. And I changed my thesis to why one should not do what they were doing instead of doing the experiment. It was really, I can't even talk about it even now. I was traumatized by it. And I'm sure that every one of those kids was completely traumatized by it. Yeah.
And it's interesting because you said about, about him being a 13-year-old and, quite curious and I'm taking this more from the book now, but and quite interested in other things. And,
sure.
So why would they have a 13-year-old child just sit there putting in pieces on a really simple puzzle?
Probably because they assumed that, I think this assumption is actually often made with the, in general, because my son is now 25 and he has very limited verbal abilities. First of all, he thinks in pictures. And so it takes a long time to translate things back from pictures into words. And he only does it, I think, to communicate to others because he's very sociable and he wants to interact with others. And I also think he has a very difficult time with motor organization. So organizing speech is incredibly difficult. To organize, to engage his mouth and get out the words is difficult. So he has minimal verbal abilities, and he'll speak in very short sentences. And if he can get away with it with 1 word or 2 words, and unless we make him work hard, and people see that and assume that he doesn't have abilities or intelligence. Which is absolutely untrue. He's got like an encyclopedia in his head, and he does better writing, or WhatsApp is a great app for him because he has a cell phone and he writes WhatsApp and he chats back and forth, and that's much more effective than any other way of trying to communicate with him. But people assume, and I see it all the time, that if the person doesn't have a high verbal ability, that they think other abilities, they're incapable of learning other things, which is why then they would continue doing puzzle pieces or simple math with somebody that might have much higher abilities but doesn't have a way to express it.
Yeah, there's all these assumptions put on autistic people. And I think definitely not non-speaking or minimally speaking people, most definitely. Autistic people with learning disability. Yeah, it's a massive thing in the UK as well. And it's very patronizing and it's very infantilizing. And then, this school that you were talking about has created a padded room. And it sounds like the padded room was used because the school system has created overwhelm and frustration in the young people.
No question about it.
Yeah, so it's
and I don't know now. They say ABA is nicer and whatever, and perhaps they're doing. Although there are places that's not the case. There are lawsuits in the States about one school that uses shockers, but I think in a lot of cases it probably is gentler from what I'm understanding. But the premise is that autism and stimming are bad and need to be, any autistic-like behavior should be extinguished, which for me marks a fundamental misunderstanding of why somebody would stim. And actually it was very interesting because after my brain surgery, my vestibular system became completely unbalanced. And I would feel like I had like 50 pounds of weight pushing me left. I would stand up and I would feel like somebody was pushing on me. And the only thing that would orient me was to actually rock. So I would find myself standing and rocking. And And my physical therapist said, "Oh, hold on to the chair and rock back and forth and back and forth." And I looked at her and I just burst out laughing. I said, "Are you kidding? Are you telling me to rock? Are you teaching me to rock?" She said, "Of course, it bounces out a vestibular system." And I said, "Well, if I was autistic, you would tell me that's forbidden because it's a sin." And that was really it. I mean, for me, that stims they have a purpose, and you can't make them go away. And at the time, I remember the conversation in the school was, "Oh, what's really hard about extinguishment behaviors, because you extinguish one and then another one comes in its place." And it's like, all right, of course another one comes in its place, because the person's trying to balance themselves out. So if you forbid them for doing one, something else is going to come because they're trying to regulate their system. So anyone doing that kind of stuff to someone is damaging. It's just horrible.
Absolutely, because you see all this. There's a new word for ABA. I don't know if it's just in the UK. Positive behavioural. It's PBS. I cannot, for the life of me, remember what the S is now. And okay, so it might be gentler.
Yeah.
But like you say, it's saying to autistic people that you can't embody your autisticness in any way, shape, or form. So it's all conformity.
I know where it comes from. The feeling is, I mean, as a parent, when my child was very young, I remember looking at him, and there were times when I would call him or I'd try and interact with him, and he was somewhere else, right? And he would be rocking, or he was stimming in some way, or staring at the lights, or whatever the heck he was doing. And I would be like, I don't want him to spend all of his time disconnected from the world. So coming from that place, but there are ways to figure out why the person is doing it. And that's the missing piece, is to observe the child and see, well, okay, first of all, it's not bad sometimes to just disconnect from the world. We all do it, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So I'm not talking about that, but about the fear. And a lot of what parents do or are convinced to do comes from the fact that they fear for their child's future. When your child is diagnosed, diagnosticians will say to you, if you don't do this and do it all day long and everybody do it, then their future is going to be ruined and they will have no chance. And if you don't do it from a young age, there's no way to help your kid. And so they instill this terrible fear. And parents who love their child will often do things that doesn't feel right in their bellies, but all the experts are telling them that that's what they need to do. And since it's new to them and they don't have the comparative data, let's say, that I had by seeing this and that, and you can do something different, they fall for it. But if you observe at the point that the child is disconnected, you say, oh, maybe there's a funny noise in the room, or maybe there's some sort of overstimulation, or if I just sit next to him and I do the same thing he's doing, then he'll look at me, which is what I used to do. Yeah. And then we would take it from there and start playing with something else, But it was meeting him at where he was at, and when he was ready. I won't leave him on his own all day long, but I cannot make him be what he isn't. Yeah, and first absolutely. Of all, there's nothing wrong with what he is either.
Yeah.
But exactly. Want him to be able to be a content adult. And I think that's what happens with most parents as they're looking for ways to help their child become a content and as independent as possible adult, because they know that one day they're not going to be there to mediate, interpret, and take care of that child. And that's what's the motivator for parents to try almost anything.
Yeah.
And that is what is the fuel for a system that was designed to, it's going to sound awful, but I say what I think, right? To make lots of money as a big business, autism, and
absolutely
big business. And if you can convince everybody that this is the only way to go, and there's a lot of data, which is really not data, but data to prove it, parents fall for it. Yeah. I, with all of my knowledge and all of my experience, I've been in rooms with 10 professionals. I'm talking school principals, therapists, everybody that say to me that I am negligent for not going down that road with my child. And I knew, I said to them, where I think they should go. and that I knew what I was talking about, and they
Mm.
had to follow my lead. And then they would say to me, "Well, you're a parent here. You're not a professional, and so you're not objective. So, oh yeah, that happened. I can't tell you how many meetings that happened in."
Yeah.
Um,
I
and
roll
then
my eyes because I hear it all the time, and I have a
sure,
feeling.
yeah.
I mean, we've got an 18-month-old at home, but I'm
Mhm.
neurodivergent, and my husband is, and
Mhm.
I have a feeling we've got all of this to come at some point. I dare
Oh
say.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
the thing that I used to say to professionals, they would say, "Oh, you're like a lioness. You're such a great advocate for your kid." And like I can't even count how many times that's been said to me in meetings
Mm.
all these years, because people know that I'm nuts. Like, you don't mess with my kids. I will go
Yeah.
there. And I look at them and I say, "Well, isn't it a shame that I need to be?
Yeah.
Why
Because
do
it's
I have to go through this
exhausting.
war? There shouldn't be a war. You should work with me and then talk to me and listen to me. And I know my kid better than you guys." And
Absolutely.
actually, a hint to parents is find professionals that will do that with you, because there are, that will work in a child-centered way and that will appreciate and will listen to you and teach you what you don't know, but that will work with you and not tell you what to do. And that's my advice to parents, for sure. And to follow your gut instinct, because don't fall for it. Don't fall for it. Look at
Yeah.
your child.
Yeah. But there's definitely coercion. There's definitely,
Mhm.
um, fear driven,
Sure.
very manipulative.
Yeah.
And I think, I can't remember who was writing about it the other day. Um, it was either autistic typing or fidgets and fries, um, both of which are either black or indigenous people of color who live in the United States. And
Mhm.
they were talking about how, some families are actually mandated to put their autistic children, um, through ABA
Yeah.
therapy, very much in inverted commas there. Um,
Well, even.
with threats of having their children kind of taken away from them, and obviously with the history of kind of black and indigenous people over in the United States, this is not an empty threat. This is currently happening, has hundreds of years worth of history of this happening to those communities. So
Sure,
it's
but even
absolutely
if they
horrifying.
don't, even if they don't go so far as to say they will take the child out of the house, okay? But if the only treatment insurance will fund is for ABA, or
Mm.
the school systems, the only kindergartens that you can put your child in have ABA therapy in it,
Mm.
then the parents who don't have endless income, and one of the other things that tends to happen to parents if they have a child with any kind of disability or challenge, is that sometimes there's a real economic challenge. So
Mm.
oftentimes one parent will work excessively and the other parent will be running around for treatments and therapies,
Mm.
and budget becomes extremely limited. And
Absolutely.
so if the only thing that's going to get funding is ABA, and they say, well, that's better than nothing, so they'll do it. So they're
Mm.
pressured, even if they're not threatened like the horrible thing you just described, but parents are left with no other choice. So if the only kindergarten that they can send their kid to is going to have ABA, then they say, well, but I can't send them to a regular kindergarten with no supports. I'll put them in a special school and then they'll get ABA. And that's how
Mm.
it works.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. It's young people and families and are just kind of cornered into it,
Yeah.
which is really horrifying.
Yeah.
Um, I think if we could go back to like other advice you have for families of, people who are newly diagnosed, I actually, wrote down something from your book because it really resonated with me and I really liked it. So if I could read that out and then we'll have a
Sure.
discussion about it, that'd be
Yeah.
brilliant. So you said, on page 24, you said one of the most important things you will need to do after receiving a diagnosis is to take a deep breath.
Yeah.
Take time to digest the news. And I suggest you leave the why behind and focus on doing your best to support each other and to investigate your next steps together. And I
Mhm.
loved that. I loved the idea, because I work with, a lot of, I do work with a speech language therapist as well as millions of other things I do. And a lot of those children and families that we're working with, they're under 5.
Mhm.
And the word autism gets kind of rippled to them in the various people that they talk to. And we've got some people in our family groups that are just sold the idea of never going to be happy, never going to be productive or amount to anything, and all these other kind of capitalist ideas of what being human is anyways. But and these people are actually like seriously concerned for their children, as they would be. I'm a parent. If I got told that, I'd be absolutely horrified.
Mhm.
So yeah, I just wondered if you had any more advice for people like that who have got this autism diagnosis looming around their child perhaps, and don't, there's a lot of emotions around that. I just wondered if you had any more advice for that.
I do. Well, first thing as parents, first thing is to remember that the child you loved the day before the diagnosis is the same child that you love after the diagnosis. That's the first thing. Nothing happened. What happened, sometimes people get so concerned with looking at the child now and finding the diagnosis in their child that the diagnosis becomes before the child, as opposed to the child being just the child. And it's very confusing and very upsetting. So remember, nothing changed. Nothing happened. And then the other thing is that everyone copes very differently. So there's one parent that might go on Google and start reading the DSM and reading every single article they can find, and the other person might say, oh, my child's future is going to be miserable, and become depressed. I mean, like, there's all kinds of reactions that people have, and I think to just breathe and try and understand that each person will process the news differently. Unfortunately, the divorce rate is very high for couples with autistic or otherwise disabled children, and I think a lot of it comes from sometimes trying to figure out what happened, or different ways of coping, or blame, or whatever. And the parents would just stop and say, wait a minute, I have a different child, and that's it. And it's not because of either parent. It's we've been blessed, okay? We've been blessed with a different journey, and it's a different one than we expected, but we need to be together on this, and our child is not doomed. Unfortunately, many professionals will cause parents to feel the child might be doomed, or their future might be doomed. I think the worst possible thing to do is read that DSM diagnosis, because if you do that, you are going to think that your child is inevitably doomed to a misery and incapable of bonding, and capable of who knows what. And I understand why DSM does what it does, but it's not going to help anybody to look at that. Look at your kid. The best thing you can do is look at your child and say, okay, where are the challenges? How can I help them? What method is the easiest way to communicate with them? What are they trying to communicate with me when they are doing A, B, C, D, or E? Is something sensory. The biggest thing I think with autism, and then the way I particularly look at autism, is that there are sensory issues, and sensory scrambling, and sensory hypersensitivity, or all kinds of things like that. And I think that's the most prominent feature of autism is coping with whatever sensory stuff is going on. And after that comes motor organization. I may be wrong, right? But that's my observation, and that's my feeling, because of sensory rules. And if your input or processing or output is different, and your motor organization on top of that is challenged, you will not relate to the world in a typical fashion. And if you're totally overwhelmed by sensory stimuli, you gotta get a break. It's too much. So you're going to disconnect, whether it be looking at every piece of grain of sand on the beach, or whatever you're going to do, any kind of stim, just something to turn off the noise, whether it's visual or any kind of sensual noise, and balance your environment. So I think the parent's job is to start observing what makes a child feel comfortable and what makes a child tick. And not say, okay, if the child is hungry and they take me to they're not speaking, but they take my hand and take me to the fridge to open the fridge. That is communication. Don't say it's not communication.
Mhm.
It is communication.
That's
No
right.
one will convince me otherwise.
Yeah.
And if you speak at the same time and you give the child the words of what's going on, what you're doing, or you write it, or you do whatever, then you will teach the child other forms of communication or expand on their ways of communication. But I think that that's the best advice I can offer, is to be patient with each other and start observing and follow your child's lead in that sense. Don't fight with them about fancy clothing and things like that. They don't have to be a fashion model, because if the clothes are itching or they feel like they have something prickling them, then they're never going to be able to focus or concentrate all day long. If they got itchy tongue, they can't learn, right? So I've learned, and I have, again, personal experience, not only as a parent, but personal experience as me over the last number of years. You cannot reason with your senses. You cannot fight with your senses. If you are having visual, if I look at somebody and their face melts, I'm not going to look at them. And that was what's happening to me from my earlobe, from light sensitivity. And it's very not well known, but I mean, a person's face would melt. They would look like a monster. Stairways would spin. Streets would suddenly rise up. I mean, insane stuff, right? Now, if I was a child and I didn't have the experience to have a conversation in my head that my eyes were playing tricks on me, but if I was a child and that was my only experience, no way would I have gone into a stairwell. I would have tantrum going into a car. I would never look at somebody's face because I wouldn't know what it was going to do. And if people forced me to do that, I would definitely have the PTSD. And I am not autistic, but I'm sure if I was a kid and I had all the sensory stuff that I've got now, I would have been diagnosed autistic. There's no question in my mind, because of the sensory stuff. Now, everyone's different. I can only speak from my personal experience and I don't know how many hundreds of kids I've seen over the years and a parent. Everyone is totally different. So just diagnosis doesn't matter. Not ADHD and not dyslexia, not autism, and not anything else. What's the deal? They throw around all these letters. The professional will say, your kid has blah, and they send you home. That's exactly what happened to me. Yeah. And the parent goes, okay, what now? What now? What am I supposed to do? And how am I going to ensure their future? And it's very difficult. It just needs to be look, observe, experiment, and love your kid, and assume that inside their core is a, per se, regular human being. What regular human beings want? Love, respect, and to do what, discover their inner drives, desires, dreams, and to, our job is to give them the tools to do that, to feel comfortable and to interact in the way that works for them.
Absolutely.
That's the attitude that I can, and ignore the diagnosis. Just ignore the damn diagnosis. That's my feeling about it.
Absolutely.
Actually, one thing I want to add about that is,
absolutely,
there's an argument. Early diagnosis is very important, but actually, in some ways, it might not be such a gift to have early diagnosis. It makes you eligible for services, but what happens many times is that people start seeing whatever the diagnosis is instead of the person with an early diagnosis. Or ABA, people who are diagnosed with autism in a young age are sent. I've seen so many of them. They get a diagnosis, and then everyone goes to ABA because that's what you do with a young autistic child or something like that. And a lot of late diagnosed autistic adults, they're relieved that they've diagnosed because they knew they were different all along. But at the same time, they're doing incredible things because they haven't been through that system of seen as autistic and do this thing.
Yeah.
It's a hard balance, and I don't know the answer to when or how, or perhaps when person diagnosed. Sorry, I spoke in Hebrew in the middle. Perhaps I didn't realize until it came out well. Perhaps simply the thing to do is to learn to not pay attention to diagnosis, rather pay attention to what's difficult and what's the interest, the child's interest, and then go with that. Because if you go with the child's interest, they're going to connect with you, and then you can teach them other things while doing the things they're interested in, and that's a great way to work with them.
Because I was late diagnosed, I was diagnosed when I was 27, 28. So I've only been official for the last 4 years or 5 years or so. And I often think, because you get really reflective after a diagnosis, or at least I do, and I think, what could have been different? Or like things start clicking into place and you think, hang on, that really strange thing that happened 20 years ago now all of a sudden makes sense.
Right.
But I look at the state of the education system, particularly because that's what a lot of kids spend their time doing. And I think, when I was in school 20 years ago, like, would I have wanted to had my diagnosis of being autistic and ADHD? Probably not, because I don't think I would have gotten very well in we still call them special education schools in England, but like special education schools. I think that would have actually perhaps made my behaviours actually a lot worse, which would have affected me definitely, and obviously people around me as well. I think, but that's my personal opinion. But obviously, it's different.
It's a hard. Again, it's an individual thing, and if the treatment of of autism was not so systematically implemented, and it was more of an individual thing, and they were looking at the sensory or language or whatever the challenges may be, and it was looked at in that sense, then probably the most beneficial thing would be an early diagnosis. But because it's not, then it might be more harmful than helpful in many instances. Because I've seen so many kids that are highly verbal and get through the day, but have issues that are also put down the same path as somebody that's not, just because they have the same diagnosis. And the spectrum is so wide. How can one do that? But that's what tends to happen.
And also, like, intersectional wise, like, we don't all have the same lives. Of course we don't. So like, we're all having completely different inputs all the time, culturally and ethnically and whatever else, that just it just doesn't make sense to. But they do that with children anyways. They do that with all children, don't they? Like, systems in general just do that with all children and all human beings.
I'll tell you, I have 2 children that were diagnosed with dyslexia and ADHD. Now, and I have one of my daughters was absolutely ADHD, which was not diagnosed intentionally. And the reason was because the schools, I can't even count how many times I've been called. The schools are not allowed to tell you, give your kid Ritalin, right? But they can't. It's like against the law. But they say your child is not receiving treatment. And then they send you the neurologist, who says to you, give your child Ritalin. Now, my kids, first of all, they don't have dyslexia, because the minute they got Irlen glasses and the letters stopped moving around and the visual distortions went away. 2 children, one in 11th grade and one in 5th, who could never read more than a few paragraphs, even though they had remedial instruction from elementary school, started reading within a very short period of time. One of them had become a bookworm. I mean, it was not dyslexia, but unfortunately, children are not tested immediately in early grades the minute they seem to detect some slow reading, that perhaps it might be all they need is a colored lens, and it would solve that years of failure and inability to read and do math. I just got distracted. Hold on a minute. Put me back on track.
You were talking about 2 of your children being diagnosed ADHD.
Okay, so the only solution, and so it was sensory. It was auditory processing. Turns out they have auditory processing disorder, both of them. So they were losing a word in every sentence or every paragraph. And they have Irlen, so they APD's auditory processing is also not tested regularly. Both of these are neurological challenges. They're different types of perception and processing, and they are not measured. So your eye doctor, your optometrist will not pick up Irlen, and your didactic assistant will pick up that you can't read, but it will not pick up that that you have light sensitivity, or that a colored lens will help make the problem even go away. So that's one thing that should be tested. And auditory processing, it's not decibels, it's processing. It's what your brain does with it between your ear and your brain. And if a child is missing a couple of words in every sentence or in every paragraph, and the room, everything is moving around in the room, how on earth are they going to concentrate? Mm-hmm. They can't. So that you go to the neurologist who doesn't say, get tested, your senses tested, and let's see if there's something going on there first, which is what I think should be done, by the way. Any parent who has any kid with anything, ADHD, autism, whatever it may be, check all the senses and know to ask for Irlen syndrome, know to ask for auditory processing, because you get a normal hearing test, but you know something's going on with your kid. They're talking loud, they're missing part of words. They likely have auditory processing problem, and it's detected in a special test. If a parent knows to ask for those things, then they might be able to help their child and give them become eligible for acoustic classrooms and special colored lenses, and that will solve a lot of issues. But what they do is they send you to a neurologist who says, yeah, your kid can't concentrate. They don't find out why, and they just give you Ritalin or Concerta or whatever the drug of the day is. And kids in second grade are given stimulants, and after that, very interesting to do the experiment to see how many of those kids wind up on the streets after, and how many kids are addicted after. Because I have a feeling that there's an awful lot of them. And I'm not a researcher, and I cannot confirm that, but I have a feeling that no drug industry is going to research that particularly.
Yes, funnily enough. I mean, if people did want to look into that, I'm sure that our David Gray Hammond, who runs Emergent Divergence, has probably looked at that. A lot of what David does is around substance use, autistic and ADHD substance use, and kind of mental health and stuff like that. So
very interested to know how many of those kids were put on some sort of Ritalin type drug from the time they were in second grade. And I kept going back to the neurologist. It's something sensory, and then he would say, oh, come on, but then suddenly I had acoustic classroom, and suddenly a hearing device, and suddenly Irlen lenses, and the kid starts learning, and he says, oh, maybe there is something to that, but the medical industry is not particularly interested in learning. There wasn't a place, the minute I discovered Irlen, I went to every school director, and everybody, there wasn't a place, from the heads of education to the neurologist to the ear doctor. I went to an eye doctor, and I told everybody about Irlen and APD, and nobody jumped on the wagon and said, oh, come tell me more about it. And, oh, that's amazing. Yeah, your kid's improving. But they didn't say, maybe we should test all the other kids. Maybe we should tell parents about it. That stuff doesn't happen, which is unfortunate, right? It's going to spare a lot of, the child feels a failure when they have abilities that don't come to fruition. A child who is intelligent and capable and knows in their head the answers to everything they on a test, and then they have a problem with reading or writing, and they get a 50 or 60, and the next time they're not going to want to learn. When I check my kids, the difference between, let's say, getting an oral exam or a written exam, and all I'm talking read to and oral, was between 90 or 100 score with all the accommodations. And it would be between 30 and 50 points lower if they had to read and write by themselves. They would run out of time. The things would move around. They'd miss part of the answer. They wouldn't be able to do math. I mean, 30 to 50 points. Now let that child fail first, second, third grade, fourth grade. By the time they get to junior high, they're not learning. They're not even, and they feel like they're worthless. And that's the kind of stuff that I'm trying to change with the educational system, because it's tragic, no less than tragic. Child self-worth shouldn't be damaged. And then, of course, there's the social things where other kids pick on the child because they think they're stupid, and they make fun. And it has nothing to do with reality. It all has to do with just understanding and accommodations. And it's a crime.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Sorry, we're having a difficult discussion.
No, that's fine. It's interesting, and it needs to be spoken about, so that's absolutely fine. It's interesting because in England, we probably use it wherever, but there's a lot of in schools and stuff, they use coloured overlays for dyslexic young people. And
a lot of Irlen is more well known in England, I think, and I think that people are referred more to testing than in America and in Israel.
Mm.
I know that there's more awareness in England. If it's colored overlays, it's probably Irlen. It may be Irlen, and person can have dyslexia or Irlen or both.
Yeah,
You
of
can't
course.
have
Yeah. Yeah, it's just interesting because having worked with young people who are dyslexic and then having the coloured overlays, and then when I read it in your book the first time, and obviously when you've just said it, then I just think, oh, is there some kind of connection here? Because it will be different colours for different people. So,
Sure.
are your lenses the same colour as your children's, or what?
No, we all have totally different. It's colored. It's the alien testing is also done in two parts. The first part is colored overlays, and that's to determine if the person reacts to color. And some people stick with colored overlays just for reading, but that only addresses reading. But Irlen addresses every area of your life, which could be depth perception, night vision, ability to track a ball. One of my kids couldn't track a ball. I didn't know this until he had his Irlen test. He was an athletic kid, but he couldn't play soccer, and he experienced a lot of social isolation because all the kids played soccer, and they all said, "Oh, you're horrible at it," and they used to pick on him. And so what turned out in the Irlen assessment suddenly was that they threw a ball, and it turns out without it, he would watch it, and then it would disappear from his field of vision, and then he'd get whacked in the head with it. And the minute he put on his colored lenses, suddenly he could track the ball, and then he suddenly became a good soccer player. But these are things people don't think about: going up and down a flight of stairs, driving, not judging the distance accurately, not being able to park. All these things have to do with depth perception, which could just be Irlen. And they're not tested for, and it's unfortunate. So the second part is lenses. And basically the test goes where you're given different colors, or you try every different, or whether it's overlays or lenses, doesn't matter. Both, it's the same process of you check every color, and then if the one that looks the best, you put another one on top of it, and then another one on top of it, and you find what works best for you. So I have a combination of 3 colors. One of my kids has 4, one of the kids has just 1, and one has yellow, and one has purple, and I have gray sort of thing, and one had blue. They all have different colors, and the color can change with like during puberty. Hormones can affect it. So my kids' colors change completely during puberty, which is kind of interesting. But there are a lot of things that can affect color change. Mine's been stable for about 4 years since I've had them. But my kids, every year I take them for an eye test, and their color changes as well. The numbers and the colors, the prescriptions. They can be with or without prescription lens as well.
Yeah. Okay. Oh, that's really, that's really interesting. You've actually brought up quite a lot of, had a little list of talking points, and you've gone through them brilliantly anyways. Let me just see if there's anything else here. Yeah, so we've completely and utterly not really spoken about the second half of your book, which was about having, I don't know if you'd still like me to refer to it as a placeholder or a tumor, or...
It was tumor. In Hebrew, they say placeholder, and I looked at the report, and I didn't know what the heck they were talking about. I read in Hebrew, and then I type it into the translator. I was like, tumor.
Right, okay.
Okay, I had a tumor. I had a massive 5 centimeter round tumor with nerves, essential nerves involved, right smack in the middle of it, on my brainstem.
And you shared, so the second half of your book is actually you sharing excerpts from your diary that you kept at the time whilst you were still going through recovery, whilst you were going through several surgeries, and kind of getting back into the movement of your body and sensory understanding and stuff like that. So if you could tell us more about that, that would be really interesting.
Yeah, I can. I'm trying to think about what's well, the whole experience definitely gave me understanding, like I said in the beginning, about autism and neurodiversity, and like I said, sensory stuff rules. I mean, because one of the interesting things was that when stuff would happen to me, I had the cognitive awareness that my brain was playing tricks on me about different things. So when I would go into a place with loud music or flashing lights, I would say to myself, well, it's not going to bother me because I know it's just nothing, but actually my body would go into fight, flight, freeze, or even shut off parts of my body when I would go into sensory overwhelm. So I wouldn't even be able to walk at times because I was overwhelmed by colors or lights or sounds. That was an incredible learning experience, that cognitive doesn't overrule sensory. We cannot convince our emergency system that they're not in an emergency, which is very important to know when working. You cannot desensitize somebody. You cannot sit with an autistic child who freaks out from sound and start playing loud music to desensitize them, because it's going to get those chemicals flowing through the body anyway. So that's a really important point that I thought beforehand, and was absolutely part of my recovery, was understanding that and making every accommodation possible and avoiding every situation that would make my life difficult to ensure quality of life. That was a big takeaway from all this stuff. I don't put myself into difficult situations, and I look for anything I can, whether it be soundproofing headphones or earring glasses or whatever it may be. My recovery, my surgery was very difficult. Also, chronic pain was definitely a part of it. When I woke up, I had to learn to walk, talk, swallow, everything again. I was like a prisoner in my body. My brain, my mind would want to do a million things, and my body would just say to me, like, haha, yeah, right.
Mm-hmm.
Go. You want to go forward, and I'm just going to send you wherever the heck I want. I mean, there was an absolute fight going on all the time. It was really, really, really challenging. I think both with the things with raising my children and with myself, was that no doctor can ever determine my future, and hope is absolutely the thing that helps get you through things, and meaning in life. Those are the takeaway. I will do something meaningful. I have a reason to get out of that bed and not be depressed, because if I'm still alive and here, then I've got something I've got to be doing, which meant writing a book, which meant first healing first, and then writing my book and doing what I'm doing now. And religion was definitely a part of it. My Judaism helped me a lot, because it gives you the belief that you can always do one more mitzvah, which is like a good deed. There are good deeds between people and other people. There are good deeds between a person and God, what God expects of you. But a fundamental part of Judaism is to do good. So anyone, no matter what your state, even if you're stuck in bed, can do good. You may not be able to run around, but I can, like I said, I wrote my book sitting in my bed. I could not do it any other way, with my laptop on my lap, because I can't pick up my left arm to type. But that there's always something you can do, and there's always a reason to get up, and there's always a reason anyone can always influence the world in a better way or do good. That's my feeling, no matter what their situation is. Even if it's inspiring somebody or just talking to somebody. So that would help a lot with my mood and the journey. The journey was incredibly difficult, and I'm still in it. I mean, I'm not behind. It's not beyond. I still have a tumor in my head. Thank God it hasn't grown. And I still have a body that's full of sensory stuff and disorganized and does really weird things. And sometimes I feel like I have ants running around my entire body, or I feel like someone else is speaking out of my mouth, or who knows what else. Lots of unusual neurological things, which, again, leads me to think that perhaps a lot of the autistic or otherwise neurodivergent people out there experience some of those things. And so one can never, ever, ever understand what that person is going through without asking, and certainly can't treat it without trying to figure out what it is. And that's a big takeaway. Mm-hmm. And also that I always have such a completely different conversations. Like, there are two conversations going on always. One is the one I'm having with the other person, and one is the one going on in my head, which is often very, very different and invisible to the other human being. And that's something to keep in mind as well. And then I really learned, where or somebody would look at me and I'm not talking, or I'm sitting and I'm thinking like, I mean, once in a while, I'll just say to my husband, "Oh, was she like this beforehand?" Kind of thing. And I've got everything going on in my head. And at that time, when he said that, I was already had my cane in hand and I was whacking him over the head, but I couldn't, express. I couldn't get a word out of my mouth. So there were all these things that go on internally, and oftentimes a very rich and oftentimes even a contempt internal world that is very different from what the person on the outside would see and assume is going on the inside. And that was a big insight for me. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. The answer of your body is very much a sensory thing, I understand. And I don't know if it's like an ADHD thing for me, but there are always multiple. So I'm having a conversation with you, but I'm also, and this is not personal to you, I do this with absolutely every conversation I have. I'm also thinking, okay, so once I've, I've spoken to Jackie today, then I've got this today, and I've got that today, and I've got this going on and that going on. And sometimes I might pick up a point that, and I'm only talking about you because you're here, I'm having a conversation with you, but I might pick up a point that you've raised, and then I'll have that conversation with you in my head whilst I'm having the actual conversation with you here.
Sure.
I do that a lot, and my poor husband, I go, we've had this conversation. We've had because it's like
we did it already in your head. Yeah. I can identify with that.
Yeah, so I totally get that. I don't know. We can't be the only two people in the world who have this.
Yeah, actually, I think it's interesting. I think particularly with ADHD, the way I've talked about it with my kids, I didn't know it's called ADHD, like because people could not have the H and they still diagnose it ADHD. That's another thing that doesn't make sense. I also don't know why it's pathological. This shouldn't be pathological. What I've said to my kids is, you have split thinking, different thinking. I have it too. Sometimes my brain's going on like a freight train, and I'm processing 20 things, and I connect things up at the same time. That this one says and that one says, and a lot of CEOs and a lot of very high level people are also diagnosed with ADHD, which is considered pathological. But the way I explain it is that my kids couldn't focus, or they focus on a lot of things at once, which is more like what I would describe it as opposed to not being able to focus, but a lot going on. And I would say to them, okay, years ago we had this old computer, and you could do one or two things on that computer, and it would go, and then it would crash, right? Now we have like the highest functional iPhone. Okay, now you, child, have been gifted in your brain that iPhone. Now, you can have 50 tabs open. I have 50 tabs. My kid was taking a piss out of me this morning because I had 50 tabs open on my browser this morning. And he didn't see what was on the computer. He just saw it was on the iPhone, right? I said, you can think about, let's say, 50 things at once. But you need the skills to understand how to drive that machine. You could not operate that iPhone and all the things you're doing simultaneously unless you knew how to operate it. So your operating system is different than the average operating system, because you have the power to do lots of different things, but you got to learn to drive. If you don't, you'll be all over the place. But if you develop the skills, and everyone has different things that will help them stay on target, then you are at a serious advantage, because you'll be able to do a lot more than the average folks, because you have this thing. You just need to learn to use it correctly. And what I found is, as I've grown older, some of my children are in their 20s already, which was terrible in the school system, because they make you sit on your butt all day long and copy things and not think. But when they get out in the real world, suddenly they pick up on everything going on in the room. They're sensitive leaders. They are they can put all these different things and connect all these things together, and they're both in leadership positions everywhere they go, because of that special gift. But they needed to learn, and they needed to believe it's not a deficiency. And that's another thing, because it's marketed by the medical industry and the education industry as a deficiency.
I was just about to bring this up, actually. We did, my way of understanding time is poor. but maybe a couple of months ago on Academy, I was on here with Raven Cochrane was here. There were a few other people we were talking to, and we were actually looking at the DSM and unpicking that around ADHD and about the fact that, the word failure and deficiency and lacking and all, and all of those words there. But Raven has actually come up with their own thoughts and has actually coined the word polyenic, which I believe means like many thoughts or many trains of thought going on at the same time. So instead of this idea of, ADHD people lacking concentration, which I just think is completely and utterly ridiculous.
And often it's thoughts and sensory at the same time, and picking up every little detail. That hypersensitive stuff, that awareness of other people, and I think some of the impulsiveness also that kind of is because getting excited, and because and to keep them on track and get it out of the mouth before it goes away, kind of thing. But I think I don't know. I mean, there are times I'm frustrated because I can't concentrate, but then other times I hyper focus and can concentrate, and suddenly it's evening. I've sat down to write something and I forgot to eat all day. And these things are typical of people that are diagnosed with ADHD, which again, I do not believe is a pathology. I believe it's just something that takes a longer time to learn how to use, and it's a gift.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I actually had some. Again, you've gone through all these, anyways. It's fantastic. And I just wondered. So you wrote your book. Was it 2 years ago you brought out your book? You published your book
in March. In March it'll be 2 years.
Wow. Okay. So
a bit less, yeah.
So how did you go about that? Because we've got a lot of writers and we've got a lot of creatives in our Academy kind of community, community and people who watch this. How did you go about getting your book published?
Okay, this is a difficult one, and actually, I have a real problem that I want to solve. And if anyone has a great idea, please tell me. Is getting the word out. But I understand that it happens also with the publishing industry. So there's two different ways to publish. There's publishing where you write something and then you send it to a publisher, and they pick it up, and I guess you edit with them and you do all the stuff. And then what I understand is the marketing distribution that they do, but then marketing, I think authors in these days are expected to do a lot of the marketing on their own as well, even if you go through a publisher. I've had friends who have written books recently and said they were quite surprised about that. And a lot of people also, the publishing company will publish the book for you and distribute it for you, but you have to pay. The way I did mine was self-publishing, and I'm just learning that there are different ways. I did it through Amazon, but I've heard that Ingram Spark also has benefits in terms of getting things distributed. So basically, I sat down and wrote my book, wrote an outline, and then I basically spewed it. I sat down for like 2 months, and I had journal entries that I had written, but the rest of it just sort of came together, and that's me. I don't eat, I don't sleep, and I sat down for 2 months and wrote a book. And then I got an editor, and I got a designer. I have a background, and I've been copywriting for years, and it's writing for the internet for years. So writing is something that I know how to do and organize. But I had an editor, a very good editor, and then I found a graphic designer to design a cover, and then I found a proofreader, and I published it through Amazon. You just upload it, and then all the advertising and getting the word out is on me. That was the lowest budget that I could do. It was an investment. Book writing is, unless you get to be a bestseller or some publisher picks you up, is a money loss and not a money maker. But I didn't care. I did it because I wanted to get the word out, and I wanted to do what we're doing just now, which is to help people. And then I started a blog. Sometimes blogs are better than books, to be perfectly honest, in some ways, because if you get blog does well, then you can get the word out easier than with a book. although I'm a bookworm from the time I'm young, and I'm happy that I have a book. But it's probably best to do both. Then I got some feedback, and I got another editor. I actually had 3 editors work on my book. I re-edited, and I got feedback about the design. I made a mistake on the design because I was living in Israel and not aware that puzzle pieces are associated with Autism Speaks, and Autism Speaks does very bad things and thinks of autism as this horrible disease to be alleviated, and very ABA and all this other stuff. So for me, all the circle of life between working with autistic kids and then having an autistic son and then becoming neurodivergent, it was like all the pieces were fitting together. And everything was like the pieces of my life were fitting together. And this other circle was becoming, growing up in a non-religious house, and then discovering Jewish identity, and then coming to Israel. And like, there's so many things that just kept coming together in my life. I'm like, all the things that I've been thinking about and puzzled about are fitting together. And my son was helping me fit them together, who was autistic. So I had a picture on the cover of a child, a mom reaching up and picking puzzle pieces from the sky, the things I'm supposed to think about, and giving it to my son, and he's fitting all the pieces together. And that was the original cover of my book. And I published it, and like the day after, people from the autistic community started shouting at me, "We're not puzzle pieces to be fixed." And I was like, oh no, what, I had no idea. And so I was listening to them, and I said, let me just leave it for a while, because if it's Autism Speaks and they're so pathologizing, you know what I'm saying, right?
Yeah.
That's autism, then I'm going to leave it, because then people will pick up my book because they think it's an authority thing, because it's affiliated with this Autism Speaks. And then they'll read that I'm against all that stuff that they're saying, and maybe it will educate some people that would never have picked up the book otherwise. So I left it for like close to a year. And then I realized people were still getting upset about it, even though I explained it. So I said, no, I don't want to upset anybody. So I changed it, and I got a new cover. So I actually, 3 different times, my book was re-edited, and the cover design was changed twice, and now I'm happy with it. So it's a long process that's never really finished. The advantage of self-publishing is you have complete control over your content. You choose your editor, and you decide what goes in it. Whereas if you work with a publisher, sometimes they have stuff to say about content, the name, the design, et cetera, and it's much faster if you do it on your own, because you could just do it, finish it, and upload it. Whereas a publisher, you could be rejected by hundreds of publishers before it's worth it. So there are advantages and disadvantages, and everyone has to, figure out what to do. And if you have no budget to market it, then it's really difficult. What I can suggest is getting on LinkedIn, because then you meet lots of amazing people and get the word out through that. People can, and then you do stuff like I'm doing just now, and meet people like you who give me an opportunity.
Because you've been on, is it Unmasked Autism as well? You've been on a few.
I've been on quite a few podcasts. Some Jewish related, some overthrowing education. We talked a lot about education. That's a great podcast, by the way, if people are interested in education. Overthrowing education. It's all about education reform. So I was on there, and I'm always happy to be on podcasts and things like that. The more we write, the more we talk, the more we link up, the more we advocate together, we can bring about the change that needs to be brought about.
Absolutely, yeah. I couldn't agree more. So are you, because I feel like there's something on Amazon where it's like so people will order it, and then Amazon will print it and then send it out. It's
print on demand.
Print
Amazon,
on demand. That's it.
I have 2 different things on Amazon. I have a digital version, and I have print on demand. So like some Kindle, and it's even on Kindle Unlimited. So if someone's on Kindle Unlimited, they pay it's like a library. So people they pay a flat out fee, and they can download as many books as they want. So I have a Kindle version as well. And print on demand means that I don't have to pay for copies or hard copies of books. When someone orders a book, Amazon prints it and sends it to them, which is great, because then I don't have to fork out that. It's very expensive to here. If I want to publish my book in Hebrew, they don't have that print on demand here, so I have to pay a publisher to publish and distribute it, unless I'm one of the lucky ones that the publisher decides to do it on their own. Most of them won't. And that's a ton of money to print books. So Amazon has that option, and I think Ingram Spark also does that. I need to check out Ingram Spark as well, because some people do both, and I might just do that.
Okay. And you're still looking for someone to help with Hebrew translation?
Oh, if there was a sponsor who would be willing to do that, wow, that would be great. That would be great. If there's some organization
out there.
or Hebrew writer, or somebody who's willing to, I can find a writer and whatever, but an organization that would want to sponsor it, or money, like whatever, any kind of way to get that to happen, that would be beyond a dream. Because I know here in Israel that there would be an audience for it, particularly because Hebrew is for, Jewish, it's the language of Jewish people, and they don't have a book in their language. My book is different because it also gives practical tools, and also talks about healing, and also the Jewish identity. It is not a book to convert anyone, and it's not a book to make someone who's Jewish and not religious. I don't do that in my book, but it gives my perspective. And you read it, so but I have belief in faith, so it's part of understanding my identity in order to. So my book will make sense, but I think it will have additional interest in the Jewish community, because there's nothing that actually does all those different things.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So, like, I'm not Jewish, so the Jewish elements to me were absolutely added to your story. Of course, it did, and were interesting to me, but they don't resonate with me on a personal level, whereas in Jewish communities, obviously, it probably will do. Right. So anyone who wants to sponsor that, help with that,
that would be great.
Yes, please. And now you've written one book. Do you think you might have another book in you, or
I'm writing some blog a bit sporadically, and I have written quite a few children's books that I would love to see. That's my true love, actually, is writing for children. One of them actually is even I want to have it with music and stuff, but they're stuck in my computer for many years because I don't know how to illustrate, and you must have illustrations with children's books, and I don't know how to play music for the one that's musical, so I'm stuck with that. But I do have that's really something I would like to see happen as well.
Okay. We're after illustrators as well. Come on, people.
Illustrators, people want a partner. One book about was I had a guide dog, breeding dog for a guide dog who's also a therapy dog. That book's written. I'm trying to do something with that one. So for dog lovers, and there's so much.
Yeah,
I don't really go with anybody anywhere and do anything, basically.
Perfect. Okay. Right. So so we usually have a couple of questions just to finish off, unless there's anything else obviously you wanted to add.
Well, I think we've covered a lot, and probably people are, it was over an hour now, so.
Yeah. Okay. I'll take. Yeah. So if we just say, where can we pick up moving forward, Jackie? Where can we pick this up?
You can find it on my website. It's jackisbooks.com.
Yeah.
There's a link to my blog and to book, or on Amazon. You can type in the name of the book title, and you can find it on Amazon. And actually some other things as well. I think other Barnes and Book Depository, and it's on other sites. You can just type it in Google and find it for sure.
Perfect. And what we like to ask everyone, because sometimes our conversations do get quite deep, and we put the worlds to right, as we should do, is we like to ask everyone, and I don't know if this is going to be a thing for you, Jackie, but what is your favourite or newest stim?
Well, I guess the thing that I do is rock sometimes. I don't know if it's favorite or not, but I rock for sure to balance myself out, and I bounce my leg when I'm thinking. Those are the things that I do. Yeah, I don't have anything set.
Yeah. So do you rock whilst you walk? Does that still help with your walking at the moment, or?
No, I usually limp because my left side is weak. I did describe that in my book. You're right. I did describe that. I had to do some whole routine of bouncing my legs and all kinds of other stuff to propel myself forward. That was I was in a sensory shutdown. That happened to me once. That was really weird. My body parts just shut down because I was overwhelmed with lights and sound from a performance in an amphitheater for my child's school, and I couldn't even walk. That was crazy. But
is this when you fell in the bush? Am I remembering that correctly?
No. I was walking home from. You're giving away all this stuff.
Sorry, yeah.
You gotta read my book. There's all kinds of adventures in there.
There's all sorts of different stuff going on in there. Jackie may or may not have fallen in a bush. You'll have to read the book. You'll have to get the book from Amazon and find out.
Absolutely. I developed an affinity for flowers that time, right? That'll refresh your memory.
Yeah. Oh, hello. We've got a fact of the week. Sometimes Si likes to throw these in. The Michael Myers mask from the film Halloween is a Captain Kirk mask, sprayed white, and the eye holes were reshaped.
Oh, that's cool.
There we are. William Shatner bed. Oh dear, that's bad, isn't it? That's bad. That's a bad joke right there. Yeah. So you're not going to ask about potatoes, are you? Because you're not Ben.
What?
So just to explain it to Jackie and anyone else who's new to Academy. So when we saw Simon, so Simon's obviously doing all our technical stuff today. He usually uses an avatar, and Ben, who's our other person who usually does all the tech side of stuff, also uses an avatar. He is always a potato in his avatar. And his final question after the STEM question is, what are your favourite potato? Potatoes are bad for your health.
I don't know. I don't think all right. Science changes. Next year, they'll say they're good for your health. But you know what I like to do with them? I like to cut them in half and then cut lots of little lines on the top, right? I put them on a tray, and then I put olive oil over them and thyme and some salt, some kosher salt, the white salt, and the big salt. They call it kosher salt in England. In America, they call it kosher salt. It's not the fine salt. It's a big,
like
sea
sea salt.
Sea salt. So I put a little of that on it and black pepper, and then I bake it, and it is a delicacy. Go for it.
That does sound nice.
It's easy and it's nice.
Tasty. So yes, if you haven't got a copy of Jackie's book, get it. It's very good. Moving forward, Reflections on Autism, Neurodiversity, Brain Surgery, and Faith. So thank you very much for coming along today, Jackie.
Thank you, and I hope this is the first of many collaborations. Please,
love it.
The consult lecture. Actually, I have a lecture that I just did a few weeks ago. I put together a lecture too about sensory stuff. So always happy to collaborate. Let me know if you want to. I'm more than happy.
Oh, fabulous!
Actually, not more than happy and honored.
When you said earlier about did you say dismantling or overthrowing the education system? I was like, oh, there's going to be a lot of people on Academy who are going to like that kind of thing. But yeah, you'd be more than welcome to come along, Jackie, and talk about whatever you like. That would be fantastic by me.
Fabulous. Thanks very well.
Right, you are most welcome. Right, now's the time to awkwardly wave until the outro music comes.
Have a great day. Really. It was a pleasure meeting you.